Well, once again, greetings, early birds. So we're just doing a little video test here. If you can see me, if a couple of you would just type in, yes, I can see you, or yes, that would be helpful. Okay. Is there anyone who can hear me but not see me? If you maybe say, I can hear but can't see, if that's the case, in the chat box. Okay, Caroline says she can hear and see. That's good. What that says to me is that everything here is working just fine, and we want to make sure that your computers are working properly. So some of you might be a little alarmed that you came online and noticed that you had a video feed going. You can turn off your video. Just go up to the toolbar and you'll get an option. It might be down below, but if you hover over the toolbar, it'll grow larger, and there's an option there for turning off your video. We have your audio already turned off, but for some reason, we're testing out this software. It's a new product. We've been playing around with it for a while, but we're still getting used to it. We've already turned off your audio, so we can't hear you, and no one else can hear you. But we can't turn off your video. Like, at least we haven't found that control yet. So you can turn off your own video. I know it's a little bit alarming to come into a webinar and suddenly find out that it's a video conference and you have your bathrobe on. So you can just turn those off. I don't think that anybody else right now is seeing your feed anyway. I think it may be only me who could see your video feed, and I have them all turned off so that I can't see them. So even if your video feed is on, I don't see you, in case you're wondering about that. Would you mind? Okay. Right now, remember what you're sharing is. So we should probably do this. I'll go to this. Should we switch? You do it just to practice. All right. Let's see. Push my checkbox. Let's see here. Okay. You won't be able to see that. So just leave everything in the middle of the screen. You can't. You're gonna have to switch back and forth. Don't close that. Just click here when you want. That's good. Back in the chat box is helpful. And just use the wheel. I can't promise you it'll stay, but you can keep coming back. Okay. Very good. Well, it is 3:31, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on Docendo Discimus, by teaching we learn, how to help our children to attain mastery by having the older children teach the younger children, or having our children participate with us in the teaching of other students. If you're using the ecclesiastical pronunciation of Latin, it would be Docendo Discimus. But it means the same thing. Docendo, by teaching, and discimus, we learn, or we learn by teaching. And isn't this the case? Haven't you seen in your own lives that when you have been required to actually teach, you found yourself learning more? So this maxim has been around for hundreds of years, and it's been recognized as an important pedagogical principle. So some of you have been following me as I've been doing the 8 pedagogical principles of the classical tradition. Now might realize this could be number 9. So maybe I need to get to that perfect 10, and then we would know that we've hit all the important principles. Well, once again, I'm glad to have you join me using this crazy internet technology. And once again, I want to say that if you saw your video feed come up and you're a little frightened by that, don't worry. I don't think anyone else can see it. We have it turned off. But you can go hover up on the top or the bottom of the screen, get a toolbar, and you can turn off your video feed. Your audio is automatically turned off on our end. So we'll be using the chat box to communicate. So once again, welcome. Well, you see there on the title page, what is that? Someone tell me what you think that is in the chat box. What does that appear to be to you? A one-room schoolhouse. That is correct. And by the way, thank you, Lisa. If it's Lisa Andrea, she mentions that she could see others' video feeds, but everyone seems to have blackened their screen. So if some of you are just coming on, you can certainly just hang something over your webcam if you don't want your video feed to show. But you can also turn it off yourself. You can go to a toolbar either below or on top of the screen, and you'll have an option. Should be a little, looks like a little camera. Looks like a camera, and you can just click it and a red slash will go over it, and then your video feed will stop. So I apologize for that inconvenience. There may be a way that we can just turn that off on our end, but we're still getting used to this software. Okay, so I may have to repeat that from time to time as people join us, but I think we'll be fairly stable. Yes, this is a schoolhouse. How were people taught in this schoolhouse? Why aren't there more classrooms? Well, does anyone know the answer to that question? Why aren't there more classrooms? Well, it was because there weren't enough students, for one. This would be in a rural area. You go back, say, think of the 1800s in America, the early 1800s in particular, largely rural society. People would come sometimes from a ways away to the schoolhouse, and there just weren't enough kids around for there to be a larger building. So they would educate all of these children in one room. And I want to just click down here, and I would like to find, I guess I can use this, but it kind of skips ahead when I use the mouse. I'd like to just be able to click through it.
Down here? Doesn't work? Click right here. Okay, down here. I don't know. Just don't use the pen right now. Just use this.
Gotcha. Thank you. Got a little help there. Now I am clicking through, but I have also lost.
You can use the pen.
Yeah, I just lost the chat box now.
Right. You're going to get one or the other. You have to switch back and forth.
Very good. Thank you for bearing with me here as I get used to some of this technology myself. So if you want some notes, let me just go through a few preliminary matters, and we'll get right back into this. If you would like this PDF of the presentation, email me at info@classicalsubjects.com. We'd be glad to email you this presentation for your own use. Also, we have a academy here at Classical Academic Press, an online academy that has been launched this spring called Scole Academy. And right now we have a coupon code going for those of you who have come to the seminar. It's Scole10 GHC. That'll give you 10% off if you order any Scole courses before March 31st. Also, this book is always available for free as a download. my Introduction to Classical Education. And we have a new book, and I have a copy of it here as well, this liberal arts tradition. It's a kind of a 102 version of the book. It's a little more challenging than maybe, say, this book, the introductory pamphlet, but I think you'll enjoy it as it does a really good job of recovering piety, gymnastic, education to wonder, or musical education, the 7 liberal arts, of course, going on to a study of philosophy and theology, the old classical curriculum, very, very nicely explained by Ravi Jain and Kevin Clark. So we're going to give one of these away just a little bit. And then we also have this little book. I know the covers look similar, but they're different. This is a student's guide to classical education, and it features a woman that has gone through classical education for 12 years, sharing her experience. She just recently graduated from college and is talking about what that is like. I know her pretty well. You might guess who she is. Okay, so there's the student's guide right there, a K through 12 guide to classical education from a student's perspective. And now we're on to the matter at hand. Thomas Aquinas would pray this prior to doing his educational work. He would pray this: grant me keenness of mind, capacity to remember, skill in learning, subtlety to interpret, and eloquence of speech. May you guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to completion. Now, if I can get the chat box back up, I think I can. Now, the first person who can properly translate that Latin phrase at the bottom of the prayer will get a free copy of the liberal arts tradition. So what does ante studium mean? Well, we have at least lots of people answering correctly, which is really, really edifying to me. But the winner is going to be Maria. So Maria, congratulations, you were quick on your keyboard. It does mean before study, ante studium. So Maria, if you would just send an email to info@classicalsubjects.com. We trust everybody here, and we will make sure we get your address. If you can maybe include in your email your address and your name, of course, we'll send you a copy of the liberal arts tradition. Ante studium does mean before prayer, before study. And, you know, I think it's appropriate to do this, to ask God for all of these things. And if Aquinas did this, I think we would be in good stead to follow in his footsteps. So may God do that today. Give all of us keenness of mind, capacity to remember, skill in learning, subtlety to interpret, and eloquence of speech. May he guide the beginning of our work, direct its progress, and bring it to completion. Amen. All right. As we're recovering a tradition of education that we would call classical, just meaning that it's been the prevalent, prevailing way of doing education until about 1900, we're trying to put together some pieces of a puzzle. You know, prior to, say, 1900, people really didn't refer to education as classical education because it was really the only kind of education that was around. But now, because of the advent of progressive modern education starting in about 1900, and that's its own story, when we look back, we say, well, that's the classical kind of education, which means enduring and excellent, good and true. As we're trying to recover that, we're recovering a set of ideas and practices that have worked to help human beings to be very well educated and prepared to serve in many, many centuries. And we find that, of course, it works very, very well even in the 21st century. Here we are in 2014. But as we're trying to recover it, we're finding that it's a little bit difficult. It's like learning to walk after a brain injury or something. We're trying to recover something that wasn't really given to us with integrity and cohesion. So it's a bit challenging. And so you see all these different pieces. And right now we're going to focus on one piece that we're calling pedagogy, that piece in the middle. Let's see if I can make this pen work and give that a try. Look at that, it's working. So part of pedagogy means teaching methods. So one way of teaching well, teaching students well, maybe it seems paradoxical at first, but is to have students teach. Because really, if you think about it, you're a teacher, right? But aren't you still a student? So perhaps a teacher is really just a more mature student, because we never stop studying, we never stop learning. In fact, I know some of you who have followed some of my seminars and talks will have heard this before, but it's still worth saying to those who may not have heard it. The Latin word studium means study, but it really means zeal and eagerness at its root. And the Latin verb studere, which means to have zeal for, to be eager for, to even have affection and fondness for something. So to be a student is to truly love and be zealous for truth, goodness, and beauty, for knowledge and wisdom and eloquence. So when do we stop being that kind of a person? So in one sense, we're all students. And yet there is a distinction between a student who's mature enough to be a teacher, mature enough to lead others. But you might say that a great teacher is a more mature student, and that a student is a nascent or burgeoning, growing teacher. So being a teacher and a student are really very much connected. They involve one another. You really can't be a student without, to some degree, being a teacher, because as you're seeking the true, the good, and the beautiful, and you acquire some of that, you really can't keep it unless you give it away. The good things that we receive must be given away in order to really become permanent in our lives. And that's a principle that's true not just in education. The parable of the talents. If we bury our talents, we lose them. To whom much is given, much is required. But at the end of that parable, we find that the person who buried his talents loses that talent. And the person who used and invested the talents received even more. So we must give away what we receive. As we read in Scripture, freely you've received, freely give. So that's kind of at the root of this idea of Docendo Discimus. By teaching, we learn. So we want to get these pieces of the puzzle together. That's going to take some time. In fact, it's going to take years. So if some of you are new to the renewal of classical education, you might be feeling a little overwhelmed. Well, don't we all? And some of us maybe are less behind than others in this recovery, but it's still an ongoing process. And what was lost over many years will take some years to recover. So don't expect that you're going to read one book like even this fantastic book and recover it in 6 months or 18 months. It's a process of learning a new culture, and you need to be patient with yourselves. Okay. So to go forward, and I'll finish my introductory remarks here. Sometimes when we've lost our way, we need to return home. Proverbs 22:28 says that we shouldn't remove the ancient landmarks. And Jeremiah 6:16 talks about keeping to the ancient paths. If the old roads have worked really well, we should continue to walk upon them. I was joking about if you can't find the chat box, well, then just let us know by writing us a message in the chat box. Well, that doesn't work too well. A few weeks ago, I was visiting some friends in Idaho, and I woke up in the morning and I couldn't find my glasses. They had usually put them on my nightstand. Somehow they got knocked off. And I'm fairly nearsighted, so I'm trying to find my glasses. And all I need to find my glasses is my glasses, because I can't really see without my glasses. So how do you acquire the ability to see when your eyes are bad, when you can't find the right lenses? So we're kind of doing that. So we need people to help. We need to help one another. So I actually went downstairs and asked my friend, Dave, can you help me find my glasses? And we eventually did. Chesterton says that every revolution is a restoration, and he's playing with that word revolve, which means to move around. Volvo in Latin means to to turn, and rewo means to turn again. So really when something is restored, it's as if we're coming back to something that's really important and that has worked well. So a revolution is actually a restoration. Sarah says that we can go back in time, not as time travelers, and not to say in an antiquarian or nostalgic sense to say, well, let's use parchment again and quill pens and wax tablets. We don't go back in that sense. We can't go back to the 1700s or some other time you might choose. But we can go back in the sense of revising an error. We can go back in the sense of reviving and renewing really good ideas that work at all times, because these ideas from the classical tradition are evergreen ideas that really never grow old. And I think Docendo Discimus is one of those maxims or ideas that works all the time. Students, if they're to master something, need to be teaching as they are able. They need to be teaching the things they are learning. So here you see an image of an older boy working with a younger boy. I think that gets at it. So in the one-room schoolhouses, this could happen. Let's look at some other images. Here's the old one-room schoolhouse, often on a prairie somewhere. It's kind of, this is kind of a archetypical image from our American past, isn't it? The old one-room schoolhouse. What comes to your mind when you think of the one-room schoolhouse? Do you think of, what was that? There was a show on, Rob, do you remember the name of that show with Christy? Christy, I think it was called Christy, but it featured based on some novels called Christy, a young woman who became a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse like this. And that might have kind of harkened back to those times. I hope this isn't what first comes to your mind. There probably are some things that have happened in the old way of education, even in this country, that we might not want to continue. Not everything that is old is good, just like everything that is new is not good. The age of something is not the primary qualifier of whether something is good or not. There are other reasons. But this is also what happened. Students of varying ages together in one room. Now, you know, in the American system, Ken Robinson says we educate children in batches. So we have like a box of children that graduate in 2014. They're all marked with that production date, and they all come together, and he imagines them kind of coming out of a factory on a conveyor belt. We educate kids by grade and by batches. And in the classical tradition, this was not always so. Students were educated certainly in groups, although the highest form of education was generally regarded to be the tutoring, where you could have, say, the philosopher Aristotle tutoring Alexander, these kinds of close relationships in either tight groups or in even one-on-one tutorials. So you think of the aristocratic families that would hire tutors or governesses to teach children, as in Mary Poppins or The Sound of Music, Fraulein Maria. I just met a girl named Maria, and so on. I don't know why I did that. So we have, even the ancient Romans, after they had conquered the Greeks, would hire educated Greeks to be tutors in the homes of their own families. So there's this tradition of tutoring, and it's not the only way that traditional or classical education was done. There was monastic education, there were cathedral schools, and then other kinds of schools that were started. There were palace schools surrounding royalty and nobles and, of course, aristocratic families. But the point is that education in small groups, and sometimes with diverse groups, was considered to be normal and even a good thing. So those of you who are homeschooling parents, you get to do this. You get to be the tutor of your children. And because you don't have 30 children, your classroom is not full with 30, you don't even have the one-room schoolhouse. Look at this young woman who is teaching. She has, let me count them. She has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. She's teaching, well, there's another desk here. Maybe there's 10. Actually, we don't know how big this classroom is, but she's got a fairly small group. And notice the age ranges. So we see this young boy here looks to be about 7 or 8. This girl here looks to be about 12 or 13. Do you think that she had anything to do, whoops, do you think that she had anything to do with his education? She did. The older would teach the younger. Let's just see here. All right, having a little technological problem here, trying to move around.
I'm going to do this. Stop.
Okay, let's see. We'll get this.
Erase.
Here we go. Thank you,
Is
Rob.
that it?
Yeah, I just want to be able to move through. That's good. Sorry about that. So here we are back to these folks. Here's another shot from a one-room schoolhouse, a little larger group. But notice again the younger kids and the older kids. Well, we'll get back to that in a moment. But let's now take a moment to just review this phrase, Docendo Discimus or Docendo Discimus, depending on which pronunciation you're using. Notice it's been put on coins or commemorative coins. It's been around for some time, and not just in one nation, but through many nations have done this. And by the way, this other phrase, ex nihilo nihilo fit, was nothing comes from nothing, and by teaching we learn. This was important to, I think this was actually a masonry, one of the Freemason groups, if I recall. But in universities, we'll find this etched into the woodwork and the stonework. Notice the owl here, and a symbol of wisdom. And notice that. Look at the child up on the right hand side, working with his or her tablet, working to write and so forth. You see right on the very top of this pillar, Docendo Discimus, by teaching we learn. And then you see the Latin on the other side. You see another tablet that says Sapere Aude, which means dare to be wise. So this has been around. Here's a commemorative sword from some other kind of fellowship. I think this had to do with one of the departments of defense in one European country. We see it in medallions that would be worn, and you can see the writing along the edge of this this medallion, Docendo Discimus. Universities have used this motto, this maxim as their motto. Here's Northeastern University in Massachusetts from a while ago, and even I found this one humorous. The Swedish Air Force, Team 60 anyway, Docendo Discimus or Docendo Discimus. Central Washington University. So it's not uncommon. I just wanted to show that this has been recognized as an important maxim around the world. You can see that maybe if you were involved in the military and say Swedish Air Force, this might be an appropriate motto. How do you think pilots are trained? Perhaps they're trained by a kind of mentorship at a certain point, where the older pilots actually teach the younger pilots, and perhaps the pilots are required as a way of actually mastering their craft to be involved in teaching. Okay, so why do we need to take advantage of these kind of pedagogical insights? Well, it's because we leak. We want mastery, and we're looking to find ways to help our students to master what it is that we are seeking to teach them. ultimately, in the classical tradition, we want to see our children grow to be wise, virtuous, and eloquent, to be educated, nourished souls, not just workers. We want them to acquire skills, to be sure, so that they can be successful in a variety of vocations and jobs, but much more beyond. That's aiming far too low. The classical tradition aimed at the cultivation of a human being so that he or she could become the best version of himself or herself. Wisdom, a wise person, liberally educated and prepared for every good work and any profession that he or she would seek to take on. But we leak, and attaining mastery that would enable us to be these kinds of servants is a problem because we do leak. So how do we make learning permanent? Well, first of all, let's just acknowledge that we leak, that we forget, and that there's a variety of kinds of forgetting, just as there's a variety of remembering. The research shows that we all do forget, and we follow a generally recognizable pattern that we'll look at in a moment. But we do forget at different rates depending on circumstances, teaching methods, and who we are. But we do forget. And there's a variety of remembering too. Like, it's one thing to recollect what Docendo Discimus means. What does it mean in English? If you can tell me right now, then you can recollect it. It's by teaching we learn. On the other hand, if a few days from now I say to you, which of these three phrases means by teaching we learn? And I showed you, say, sapere aude, and I showed you repetitio mater memoriae, and I showed you Docendo Discimus, you would recognize the one that was correct. That's a kind of memory too. Might not be as high level as recollection, but it's still memory. And then we discover that we tend to remember the things that really cause us to be at wonder, to really be admiring things. When we are really caught up gazing at something that we consider to be profound, important, beautiful, good or true, we tend to remember that more. So it's important that we help people or students to be at wonder. We need to return to our childhood in one sense and to continue to cultivate wonder. That will help with the leaking. Chesterton says that, when the 8-year-old opens the door and finds a dragon, he's quite excited, but the 3-year-old Tommy is just excited that there's a door that can be opened. So returning back to our childhood, when we tended to engage in wonder is a helpful thing, but we do leak. The research does show that there's a wide variety in forgetting, but we do forget. How much do people forget? Well, it depends. It depends on the type of material being learned, the learner's prior knowledge, the learner's motivation to learn, power of the learning methods that are used, the contextual clues in the learning situations, and the amount of time that the learning has to be retained. And finally, the difficulty of the retention test, or the test of memory. So we don't have to go into this in much detail other than to recognize that modern research does show that we forget, but how much we forget depends on a lot of these factors. Well, we do want to teach to mastery, and I think that Docendo Discimus can actually help us to overcome this challenge, this problem we have of leaking. So Thalheimer, by the way, who's done some significant research on forgetting, says that the lessons learned from the research are these: that while there's a wide variety in forgetting, there is a general forgetting curve that we can predict. He also says that on average, people do forget information in a predictable manner. We'll look at that in just a second. And that people forget more information shortly after learning it, but gradually the pace of forgetting slows. Here's the forgetting curve, that generally as time goes on, you'll see a kind of dip. At first, you see the steep decline, meaning a lot of forgetting in the short term, but then after you've done most of your forgetting, you stop forgetting what remains over time. It follows this kind of curve. So what can we do to help students to truly master and remember the important things? Well, in my talks on the 8 essential principles of classical education, we talk about some other principles that help. One of them was repetitio mater memoriae, that repetition and review and revisiting, not just rote repetition, but ongoing circling and review of the things that are important tends to make learning permanent. We talked about using songs and chants and jingles, especially with younger children, as a way of helping make learning permanent. But where learning becomes more permanent, we can kind of break away from this forgetting curve when there is more meaning attached to what we're doing. The more meaning, the more wonder, the more curiosity, and the more connections that we're making as we're learning something, the more likely it's going to stay with us. We tend to forget certain kinds of things more in certain kinds of settings. And let's take a look at that. Teaching lessons matter. Meaning matters. The learning and teaching methods matter. The context matters. The way that you practice trying to remember what you've been doing matters. It also matters that repetition or review is spaced in a particular way. You know, a lot of regular review helps make learning present rather than just one review at the end of a term. That's not as helpful. It's better to do ongoing, spaced review. You probably know that. And then, of course, wonder, admiration, and gratitude help to make things memorable. Well, here's what this is not highly scientific, highly verified scientific research, but I have seen this in a couple of places, and I think there's at least some anecdotal credibility to what's before you right here, the best settings for memory. Look at the bottom. Let's go from the bottom first. When you hear a lecture, you're likely to remember less. That's one of the least effective ways for you to receive information and actually master it. Oh, that's kind of what I'm doing now. Now, at least you have some visuals, right? You can see some things on the screen, and if I were wise and wasn't scared of the technology, I would be, doing this. Now I'm afraid I won't be able to move this anymore, but I think I will. So 5% from lecture. Think about the sermons you've heard. Can you remember the sermon that you heard five or 6 weeks ago? Can you remember a sermon from February, from January? It's more difficult, isn't it? So 10%. Now, of course, these again are generalizations, and they're not verified by any highly vetted scientific reports I've seen. But we tend to memorize more when we read than from a lecture, and of course, this can vary from person to person. Say an increase of up to 20% when there's audio and visual involved, when your ear and your eye are also involved. It seems to be very important that the eye is involved along with the ear. That helps. Multiple sensual pathways. 30% when you see a demonstration, when you can actually see physical objects, maybe even touch something. Maybe you think of a physics professor showing you the rate at which things fall with bowling balls tied to the ceiling with chains, and they're swinging across the classroom as he's illustrating some principle of physics. The demonstrations do help. Working with test tubes, things exploding in your chemistry class, all of that helps. And you can probably remember a few chemistry classes where you got to make something fizz, fire, or explode. 50% when engaged in group discussion. So the more we can be engaged in actually talking through things, the more helpful it is. So at the end of this seminar, we're going to engage in some discussion, and hopefully that will help you retain. 75% when you practice what is learned. So if I'm describing to you how to use a bowling ball and roll it down a bowling alley to hit pins, and I'm giving you a lecture on that, and there's just nothing but audio, you might not remember too much. If you see me demonstrate it, and I actually roll that ball in front of you, and you see me actually hit a strike and you're impressed, that might help you to remember things too. And if you see my lovely form and brand new bowling shoes, all of this can help. Got that visual thing going on. I'm demonstrating for you how to roll a bowling ball. But that's not enough. We want to discuss it. So we sit around and we have a Coke around the what do you call that area where the bowlers all sit, and we discuss the right form. But of course, it's going to be very helpful for you to actually grab a bowling ball and roll it yourself several times. But finally, the highest form of retention is when you are actually teaching the things that you have learned. So if we can have you, after a while, actually teaching another group of people, even us, how to roll the bowling ball, how to hold it, what form to take, what foot to start with, if you're right-handed or left-handed, and so forth, you might just learn even more or retain even more if you give us a demonstration, even of what you have recently or just learned. Docendo Discimus. Haven't you seen this in your own life? Then why aren't we doing this with our children? Why do we treat our children as passive, open skulls that we pour information into and then close the tops of their head and expect that they would remember this? And we want them to remember it and spit it back maybe on some kind of a worksheet or test. Why don't we even do oral assessments where we ask our students to actually express to us using words and a narration what they have learned? I think we should do written tests as well, but we don't seem to do too much of the oral. We don't seem to discuss as much. That's also a way that students can demonstrate learning and also retain learning. So this is worth thinking about, don't you think? And why is it that we don't do this so much? Could it be that we tend to teach the way we were taught? And so we, without even thinking about it, adopt pedagogies that were used upon us. I might even say in some cases inflicted upon us. We tend to teach the way we were taught, even when we don't want to. So the tradition, and Docendo Discimus is part of the tradition, kind of wakes us up and makes us ask if we're really doing things the way we want to. And it gives us a kind of contrast and the ability to think maybe freshly and differently about the way we teach. Well, because we want to teach for mastery, and of course I'm assuming this, I'm not going to make a case for this right now, but I think if we're not teaching for mastery, I'm not quite sure what we're teaching for. We don't simply want to cover material and pass quizzes and engage in the all too typical cram, test, and forget cycle where we go through some steps but really don't master anything. Can you think of some courses that you've had in high school and college where you've gotten A's or B's, moved through the steps, put things in your short-term memory, did well on the examinations, but then really didn't retain anything permanently? What's the point of that? So I think we want to teach for mastery, which means we probably need more repetition and review. The brain, it seems, is not just meant to take in large amounts of information, store it in the long-term memory like that. For us to retain things, it's almost as if our brain says, look, I'm glad I've heard this, but I'm not going to keep it here unless you give me some signals that it's really important for us to keep, because there's other information coming in all the time and I only have so much space. So I need to make room for what else is coming. So you let me know if you want it to be permanent. And if you want it to be permanent, I'll know that by a few things that you do. Well, what is that as you're talking to your brain? Well, let's keep coming back to it. If you keep coming back to it, I'll know that you really want it to stay here on the shelf. So regular review and repetition. And of course we could say, if you're actually teaching it, I guess it's important for us to keep this on the shelf. Now I am not a neurologist. That's complete speculation, but it seems to me something like that's going on. So repetitio mater memoriae. This means that repetition is the mother of memory. And it doesn't just mean rote repetition. It means just coming back to things. And you can come back to things in a lot of ways. You can circle things in Socratic discussion. Socratic discussion can be viewed, along with some other ways, as coming back around the truth, goodness, and beauty that's before you and looking at it from different perspectives and exploring this wonderful cathedral of truth, goodness, and beauty that you find yourself in. You don't just get out. You have to stay there for a while. You camp there, and you do that by discussing it with friends. And some of your friends and your colleagues and, of course, your teacher help you to see things there in this cathedral that you otherwise would not see. And you're delighted that you can see things. You're given eyes to see things that otherwise you wouldn't see. And it's kind of a communal search and finding, a kind of communal treasure hunt. And of course, memorizing by heart. In the tradition, it was common to truly take things into your memory by regular visitation and recitation, and using some memory techniques, which I won't go into now. I have another seminar on memory, visualization, the memory palace, and a number of other things to help make learning permanent just by the art of memory. And taking what you've memorized, not just intellectually into your head, but into your soul or your heart, to learn it by heart. One way this was done was to make use of commonplace books. You might call them like journals that were carried around by students who would copy out great passages that they were reading in books that they loved, passages from poetry and novels and nonfiction, and of course scripture. Sometimes these were called a florilegium, which meant basically a book of flowers, because you were gathering, as it were, flowers of truth, goodness, and beauty that you wanted to keep with you always. And you can imagine that before the printing press, this would be particularly important, because you couldn't just go buy the book. So if someone lent you a valuable book, or you heard something being spoken that was really maybe someone reciting from memory, you might write it down so that you could own it, so that you could memorize it. So these books were worn out. Students would just study them and memorize their contents until they became, these good things resided in a common place in their own hearts. Isn't that great? The act of actually writing things down is a way of enhancing and increasing memory. So just writing in the journal, response papers, essays, other kinds of writing that we do is a way of doing repetition. It's a way of coming back around something and turning it over and exploring it until it acquires more meaning. And as we said, if there's more meaning, more layers of meaning, more texture, more weaving of that truth through us, the more permanent that learning is likely to become, and it's more likely that we'll attain mastery. And I just need to take a drink after that. And a drink of water. In just a moment, I'm going to pause and ask you to write down some questions. In fact, it might be good, and I don't have the chat box up right now. I only did that because I didn't want to be distracted by your great questions. But go ahead now, and if you have some questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat box, because we're going to be moving to a time of discussion. And if you don't have something to write there, just be on the alert now that as a question comes to you or a comment, put it in the chat box. That will be helpful not just for me, but for the others too. Learning for mastery also benefits from using multiple senses. Using your mouth, your voice, your ears, your eyes. This is why children in particular would often do their recitations of it, you say a history timeline, by singing it and chanting it and standing up and maybe doing hand motions and clapping as well. And there might be a visual in the learning center or classroom, so they could be looking at the history timeline, hearing it being chanted by their own voice and those of others, and then using their bodies as well, kicking in some kinesthetic learning, using multiple senses, regular review, and then finally teaching others. And that's where we're going to go now, is how do we practically do that? If you're convinced that maybe this is wise to have your own children involved in some forms appropriate to their age and level of development, teach, then how can we do that? What might be some practical ways? That's where we're going. But before we do that, forgot about this slide, let's mention this too, because this is critical, I think, that teaching, having your own children participate in teaching others, younger siblings or even their peers, even teaching back to you as the teacher or a homeschool educator, also contributes to the cultivation of their own virtue. How so? How can that be helpful to make them a more virtuous person, to acquire habits that enable them to be good students and actually better people? Well, it's loving your neighbor, for one. To be able to teach someone, to give them some knowledge or some skill or some capacity, or even to delight them with something beautiful, is a way of loving your neighbor. So if you have something that's good, you give it away if you want to maintain it and keep it. And that act of becoming generous with what you've received is the cultivation of virtue, is it not? And of course, it applies to so many other things in life. As C.S. Lewis says about each of us, we go nowhere alone. We go with our teachers anywhere we go. And as you sit here today, and some of you might even be in a car, wherever you are, wherever you're traveling, your capacities that you carry with you come to you because others have given to you, have they not? The great teachers in your life, the great parents and family members and colleagues and brothers and sisters who have given to you have helped to make you who you are. They have given to you, and you should be grateful for what has been given. And in response, you should give. The generous man himself will be blessed, the Proverbs say. So freely you have received, freely give. It's a way of blessing others. This is virtue, and in the most profound way. It's doing what you know. It's not enough to say, well, I hear it, I've received it, I know it. I will know that you have learned it. I will know that you have mastered it, we might say to our students, when you can teach it back to me, or when you can teach it to someone else. So we can do this in many different forms. We can do it even in kind of a back and forth narration where we say, okay, so you understand how the passive voice works. We've just been teaching on that. So now you tell me, how does the passive voice work in Latin? How do the endings work, and what is the difference between a verb that is being used passively and a verb that is used actively? Give me an example. If that student can readily do that, that demonstrates a high form of learning. So how does long division work? Now, we've been talking about this for a week. I want you, John, to get before us and give me your best lesson for how long division works. And of course, it might even help students to prepare lessons, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But doing what we know is also a way of cultivating virtue. It's not enough to keep learning in just the intellectual realm. We receive things not just to know them, but also to do them. Now, some things are just to be known. Sometimes we just need to know something and there's no necessary action. But often when we come to know something, it's for the purpose of some action as well. And we need to do what we know. A.G. Sertalange says, unless we do what we know, we should not expect to receive more truth, goodness, or beauty. That it's the condition for receiving more truth. It's this issue of multiplying talents as well. Use what you have, invest what you have. And what better way to do that than to help someone else to have what you have? You're asking others, and this is kind of scary, to be like you. Luke 6:36 says that when a student has been fully trained, he will be like his teacher. So if an older brother is teaching a younger brother, he's essentially saying, I want you to be like me. And if you think about what that means, it's going to cause you to repent and seek to be as well prepared as you can to teach properly, because you want, if the student is going to become like you, even your little brother, I want to be the best I can for him. That cultivates virtue. And in that same passage, Luke is comparing the teacher to the blind guides who cannot lead well. He's saying the teacher is the opposite of the blind guide. What we're doing is when we teach is we're helping others to see. We're being the opposite of a blind guide. We're being a very well-sighted guide. So we want to see well, which means we want to take the 2x4 out of our own eye before we dare to pull the speck out of our brother's eye. It seems to me that in Luke 6, Jesus is teaching, among other things, that if we are to be teachers and mentors, we have to engage in repentance. So virtue is present. Well, let's talk about practices. And some of you are thinking, that's really what we want to talk about is, well, what do we do? Well, I think you can do a number of things. But let me just pause here for a moment. This is how we're going to finish it up, and then we're going to have some discussion. And I'm going to pull up the chat box and see if there aren't some great questions. There we go. All right. And I'll make this a little bit larger if I can. All right. Great. Great questions. So you can read along with me here, but if you're looking at the chat box, Michelle says, children are really getting away from handwriting and moving towards typing more. Does typing versus handwriting affect memory and long-term learning? Lisa says, I do have a question, maybe one you can address in this next section. I feel like I'm behind in guiding my children to do this, my 11-year-old in particular. When is it best to guide them to teach their younger siblings? Do you think this could be, and then this is the Bolden family, do you think this could be appropriate for a homeschool or co-op setting? I absolutely do, and we're going to get into that right now. Recent research shows that peers are a bigger influence than parents. Even a stronger influence is sibling relationships. So learning from a sib is a strong way to reinforce learning. Agreed, absolutely. And then finally, should this be only done one-on-one, or can it be done for a group of siblings? Excellent questions. We'll go right into that, but let me answer Michelle's question first. You're right, we're not doing as much handwriting these days, typing, and maybe some of you are like me. You know, it used to be that I really couldn't think very well unless I had a pen in hand and was writing. And over the years, gradually, I find that I can probably think equally as well if I have a keyboard in front of me. And there's something about that, just the tactile, and I think we kind of adapt neurologically to these tools. You know, of course, there was a time when writing wasn't quite what it was as well. I think it's still good to do both. I think getting a commonplace notebook is a great way to start a journal that the students own. Is really theirs, and I think you should require students once a week at least to be writing some passage that they're collecting from their reading or from your instruction to them, and keeping those. And so, for example, if they're reading through the Fellowship of the Ring, every week they should write a passage. It could be just a sentence, or it could be a longer passage, something beautiful that they want to collect and actually over time memorize and commit to learn by heart. I think, and I don't know anything about this, Michelle, I haven't done any research, that I think that there's something about the writing with a hand, holding something in your hand, that I think helps memory and long-term learning. It's certainly true for me that if I write something down, even typing it, if I want to learn a poem, if I type it out, even on a computer, there's something helpful about that. Just going through that process of typing it out will helps memory. Writing as well. What I like about writing in a journal is that journal is handy, it's physical, I can always turn to it. And the memory experts, even from the Middle Ages, will say that it's much better to have one book that you keep going back to, because you know the old Bibles that you have read, if I say Philippians 4:8, you might be able to see that verse on a particular place on a page. It was in the middle of the page, it was up on top. Whereas when you're using these e-readers, it constantly is reflowing. So when I go to the Bible on my e-reader, which I do, it looks different every time. And I think that impedes memory. So there's a lot of things going on there. I think it's good to do both. These tools are remarkable. The tool we're using right now is remarkable, but I think handwriting is still very important to maintain. Okay, I think the rest of your questions are going to be hit straight up as we go. So let me go through this, and we'll continue to have some conversation. There are practices of peers teaching peers, because students can teach students either at their same age level, or they can teach up, or they can teach down. Narration, I'm thinking of peers teaching peers. You can have two 12-year-olds, two 8-year-olds narrating back to one another what from their reading, retelling the stories that they are reading in literature, even retelling what they're learning in science, retelling even what happened in a class. Okay, John, I want the two of you to have a discussion. John, I want you to share with Bill here how the passive voice works in Latin. And they narrate, and maybe if it's not even a full lesson, they explain it to one another, and they use their own words. You can narrate all kinds of things, just from narro, which means to tell. You just tell back, tell to someone what it is that you're learning. When your brain is engaged, to actually speak it and teach it something happens that helps with mastery. And plus you get to bless somebody. Reports, where you report back, written reports, oral reports on things that you've done. So if you did a biology, a biology experiment or some nature study, to write up a report, even if it's a bulleted list, then you have your students speak from and report what they saw when they spent that hour in the creek hunting for frogs or salamanders or studying algae or whatever it might be. Have them prepare something a little more, have them actually prepare a report is what I'm trying to say, rather than just have it be whatever comes to mind. Have them take a few notes first. Have them think about what they want to say before they say it. As students get older and they get more rhetoric training, they can start using the topics of invention. They can start using strategies that come from the study of the 5 canons of rhetoric, like invention and arrangement, and even style eventually, certainly delivery. I think that perhaps, and this is just Chris Perrin's guess, that 10 to 20% of all instruction perhaps should be done by students. I think that, I'm noting the time, I think that Socratic discussion, where we get around a table and actually talk about things, is going to be meaningful and useful. This would essentially work best with your older students, but just the talking through things is going to help. Planning for debates that are informal as well and brief, and then those that are formal and a little longer. So as a teacher, you could say, all right, we've just discussed the British reasons for attacking the Americans in the Revolutionary War. Let's have the British, one of you represent the British view and the other the American view. I'm going to give you about 5 or 10 minutes to prepare, and then we're going to discuss this for about 10 minutes. So they come back and it's informal, but you give them some direction. You could have that same debate and make it a much more formal affair, where you might spend 2 or 3 days studying the American perspective and the British perspective, and then using one of the debate formats, maybe even the parliamentarian debate format. And then you have each side debating with one another. And as they debate, you see they're teaching. They're teaching the audience a way of thinking about things. So they're preparing and teaching, and they will know, if they have to do that, they will learn they will better mastery of the American side and the British side. Recitations, poems, scripture, passages, have them recite what they're memorizing. That itself is a way of teaching others. If someone can stand up and deliver a 3 or 4 minute poem, everyone in the room will be instructed and blessed. Students modeling for one another by just their sharing with their excitement, their enthusiasm, their responses to the things they're learning and studying in some informal settings. Where you might say, when I was a Latin teacher, I used to say things like this. If you had a Latin moment this last week where the Latin language in some way served you and came into your thinking, share that with the class as we get started. And all kinds of things would often be shared about how Latin had lived in their lives in the past week. Okay, and now let's take a look at the next one, which is, and I'm almost done, is older teaching younger students. Well, if you have older kids and you're doing what a lot of educators are doing, and that's repeating a cycle of history where, say, for 3 or 4 years in the elementary years, kids are studying, say, Greece and Rome in 3rd grade, the medieval ages in 4th grade, early American history in 6th grade. And then if that cycle is repeated again, say in junior high and high school, why not get the older kids working with the younger kids on historical themes? So if the 9th graders or the 8th graders are studying Greece and Rome, and the 3rd grader is also doing that at the 3rd grade level, you see that there could be some wonderful teaching opportunities, really in both directions. The older kids can come down, they can prepare lessons, they can go into greater depth. The younger kids get to see an older student who knows a little bit more about the subject, a little bit more mature, and is willing to teach him and engage him in conversation and actually prepare some lessons. But even the younger kids can come out. We'll get to that in a moment. Dramas, if you're preparing little one-act plays and so forth, as that drama is being studied, have it acted. Let the play in the making be seen by the younger kids. Preparing lessons in literature and Bible. Sometimes we even have kids read books, the same books again, or versions of books at different times. Like there's the children's Homer that can be read in elementary school. The ninth graders might be reading the Iliad, and that have the literature taught, because both groups are studying the same literature, even if in different ways. Certainly that's the case with the Bible. With language, older kids who are farther along in languages like Latin, Spanish, Greek, or French can come down and teach and speak in the language and instruct in the language. The younger kids, they can lead discussions. They can participate in one-on-one coaching, helping with the tutorials, writing, math, the translation of a language. Older kids can come and recite the poems and scripture and other passages that they've memorized. And they model therefore for the younger students. And now the last slide, the younger actually teaching the older. And then let's just talk for a bit. The younger kids are just so good at memorizing. One way that they will shine in the presence of older kids is to just do their own recitations, which will likely be more impressive in some ways than the older kids. Their own history songs, their chants, their jingles, their poems, etc. Their own little dramas, the hymns that they've learned, performing music for the older kids, and older kids can do the same. Singing songs they've prepared both instrumentally and chorally, their own feats of memory, sharing their artwork and discussing it with the older students, what they were thinking, what it meant, what they were seeking to represent, and then just modeling their own open-eyed wonder at the world, which comes built into younger children, is very instructive to the older kids. You know, your 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid needs to see that wide-eyed wonder and enthusiasm, that seeking after truth, goodness, and beauty that is so innocent and open and zealous in these younger kids, to remind the older kids that they need to maintain and cultivate that themselves. Wow, I know that was a lot. So let's take a look at some of your questions. I'm going to try to wrap this up in about the next 5 or 7 minutes. I know some of you have to go, and I apologize that we're going a little late here. Question. Do you recommend, this is from Alan, do you recommend a parent overseeing the older children teaching the younger ones? I do so. I think that you will know when you don't need to supervise any longer, or at least for a time. But I don't think you want to just kind of set older kids free without some supervision. They need to be monitored, and they need to be guided. They need to be taught how to teach. So I think you do need to guide the process. With some more mature kids, after a bit of training and discussion about what's going to happen, I think you can set them free to do this independently a good bit. The Bolden family asks, could this be appropriate in a homeschooling setting? And I think the answer is absolutely it can be. I think you can see this. You can imagine breaking, just like in a one-room schoolhouse. You've got a smaller schoolhouse, but you can break up into pairs and occasionally do this. It would take some planning and thoughtfulness. You need to be looking at your curriculum and so forth, but I think it definitely can be done, and it can be done very, very well. So yes, it can be done with siblings. A Shine says this is definitely a great thing to teach one's children. It not only great, it not only reinforces what they learn, but also develops leadership skills and allows them the opportunity to demonstrate the fruits of the Spirit. Yes, it does. So there's the cultivation of virtue. Yes, I have read a study that retention is better when you take notes by writing, because you are actually thinking about what you are writing. When you type, the emphasis is different, and the thought process is not as focused on the material. I bet there's some studies out there that you could find online. And Abigail says, I need to go, and a couple others. And then finally, Lisa says, regarding wide-eyed wonder, a 4-year-old bending the body to see a small flower draws us all down, doesn't it? So we absorb that same wonder. Absolutely. We need to be around these little ones. And that's the problem of separating these kids too tightly by grade. The older kids still need to see the wonder of the younger kids and be drawn down, as Lisa says. And the younger kids need to see and be cultivated by the generous spirit of older kids who come down to spend time with them, to teach them. They perceive it immediately as a gift and as love, immediately. I remember seeing, I'll close with this, I remember seeing a 10th grader going out onto the recess, wanting to go out and spend time during recess with the K through 3 group at a classical Christian school. And when he would go out, he was about a 170-pound athletic guy. When he would go out to the playground just to play with the little kids, did they receive that as a gift? Were they ecstatic? They would hang on him like he was a Jolly Green Giant, and he would swing around 2 or 3 kindergarten girls one at a time and play these crazy games with them. Just that play, they immediately received as a gift, and they received it joyfully. And both the 10th grader and the first graders were blessed. We do need to stop, but I hope this has been helpful to you, and it will at least provoke you to further thought. We'll try to post some things. I'll try to post some articles on this in the coming weeks on my blog. But you've already spent an hour with me, a little more than an hour, so I want to be sensitive to your time and just say thank you now, and go and do your best to apply Docendo Discimus. Thanks so much. Gracias.